I haven't heard much about that whole 8 passengers thing in a while at this point, but I guess it's kind of been going on in the background, and I know that she's been in jail for a little bit. Was sentenced to something like a minimum of 4 years of jail time for child abuse or something like that. But something I didn't know is the oldest daughter, who's Shari Franke is her name, is writing a memoir about her life. Or actually, has written it, and it's came out just a little bit earlier this week. I read a few excerpts of it, which I'm going to be talking about here on the program. Which I may read the whole thing. It seems like a pretty interesting book, obviously about a very sad subject matter, but probably will be reading it at some point. And I do recommend people read it since they should get the full story here and support the victims of child abuse, which is what this was. And out of the excerpts that I've read, I want to just go over some of the ones that I found kind of the most interesting, kind of revealing about this whole situation, and maybe that'll interest some people into reading the book. So one of them was actually detailing a fight between her and her mother Ruby after she had called the police on her mom for child abuse. And by the way, I think it's interesting to point out that if I'm not mistaken, that she was in college by the time this all came out, and the mom got arrested. So that's something. But according to E News, Ruby's face was contorted with anger and hurt, is what that was put in the book, and she said, "quote I can't believe you called the police on me. After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices I've made, how could you betray me like that, Shari? How could you be so selfish?" I mean, assuming that's a real quote, which I have no reason to believe it's not. And that's got to be like one of the biggest self-reports in years. I mean, why would calling the police on you be a betrayal unless you knew you were doing something wrong that you could get arrested for, punished for? I mean, of course, unless you're doing things that are illegal and you're just hoping no one finds out about it, which is kind of what this situation was. It seems like, but why would you be upset? And especially if she's calling the police, then it shows us out of like genuine for something like child abuse. It's showing us out of genuine concern for her family. So you think if she's seriously good about her family, she would maybe appreciate the thought in it a little bit, but no, she doesn't, because it's not really about that, of course. And I mean, how can you really appreciate your family when you're duct taping their arms and legs and all that, and making it so the neighbors have to call the cops because the kids are getting abused? I mean, how could you really care about your family if you're doing stuff like that? And in addition to that, according to E News, she also said at one point, quote, "One day, Shari, you'll come crawling back to me, begging for my forgiveness. And it'll be hard for me to give it to you, but I'll be gracious." Saying that you're gracious doesn't actually make you gracious. I mean, I feel like being gracious or like forgiving, you just kind of do things that make you that. You don't say, how forgiving you are, how nice you are, how cool you are, and you just kind of do those things. It just kind of makes you an asshole if you're talking about it like that. But I don't know. It seems like people who talk like that generally are assholes and not nice people. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised, or no one should, because if you're going around talking about how, I mean, you should just do things that make you a nice person instead of talking about how you're a good person. I mean, that's kind of common sense. So if you haven't grasped that already, you're not going to. Now, another excerpt that showed how much of a jerk she was when, again, according to E! News, is where I found this excerpt. She said to Shari, "You've always hated me. Ever since you were 5 years old, I could see it in your eyes. The way you looked at me, the way you judged me. You never appreciated anything I've done for you, all the sacrifices I've made." I mean, first of all, you think your daughter hated you since she was 5 years old? I mean, even if that's true, I mean, that kind of proves it's more your fault more than anything. I mean, when you're 5 years old and younger, as a kid, you kind of just have unconditional trust or like love for your parents if they're doing a good job, or at least, not abusing them. I mean, you believe in what your parents say because they're an authority figure to you. You don't grow up like hating them unless, again, they're doing things to you that are terrible things. So if that's a true statement, it kind of reflects more on her than her daughter, because it just shows if you were abusing her since the start, then, well, there you go. That's a self-report. And then if it's not true that you hated her since then, well, that's also a pretty likely scenario. And it's just used as an excuse to not take responsibility for your own actions. And also, if anything, I mean, you're a family vlogger. So if anything, it's your daughter who sacrificed things for you, as well as all your children, like, their privacy and their dignity to be in your videos. I mean, it seems like you don't care about that at all. But if anything, I mean, you got rich off of them. And so if anything, you owe them. I mean, I understand children inherently owe their parents a lot for taking care of them and having them, bring them into the world, buying them things. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like if you're going to turn their life into a YouTube sideshow, the least you can say is it's even, the debt's repaid, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, don't if anything, your daughter doesn't really owe you anything, but whatever. Also, on a somewhat related note, when I was reading the E! News article that had a lot of these, I noticed it mentioned something I actually hadn't seen before, which is, I guess, is kind of older news about this, which is back in last March, Ruby's diary was discovered, which was, for those who don't know, basically I mean, to me, I don't know how you could see as anything besides just like a confession to a lot of her crimes, frankly. And it apparently includes entries of talking about beating her children as well as withholding food and water from them. And I will say, since I never watched this YouTube channel since it looked like crap even before all this came out, I didn't notice, but I did see in like a news segment that I was watching about this whole thing, some clip of, I guess, her on YouTube saying something like to one of her kids that, well, you keep acting up, and you just lost your dinner privileges if you keep doing that. It was kind of shocking. She was doing all this in the open for years, and no one had a problem with it. Or I don't want to say no one, but no one was. It seemed like a very little few people were calling her out, and people said were subscribing, and the weird, sad, desperate souls who watch family vlog channels were still watching, didn't have a problem with it. I mean, you people probably should be ashamed of yourselves as well for not noticing this. But anyway, the diary also has a very interesting passage about one of her sons, who she calls satanic. I don't care what your kid's doing. I mean, that's like short of like shooting up a school or something. You can't call your own child satanic. Like that's. I mean, if I saw my parents were saying that about me in some way, I'd be scarred for life. I mean, but again, that would speak more badly on the parent than the child, if anything. And if you seriously do that, like, I don't know how you can call yourself either a good parent or a good Christian to say things like that about your child. And I didn't write the whole thing down because it was not completely relevant, but I did read that set passage, and she was going to these really weird comments about talking about how the kid like isn't going to heaven if he acts the way he does and all that. And it's just, geez, I mean, maybe the fact that you raise your kids to be that bad kind of says more about you than them. I mean, I'm always kind of resistant to hear parents talk about how their kids are bad or whatever in most situations. You raised them, you kind of made them this way. So I don't really want to hear about how your kids are doing bad things, especially when you're a complete psychopath yourself, clearly. So your perception of right and wrong is pretty skewed, to say the least. And it's also interesting to note that according to People, Shari mentioned in her book that when she was 18, her and Ruby went bra shopping, and Ruby filmed it. That's just a wonderful thing to put on a channel with a bunch of kids featured on it, right? And also, a bunch of children are probably watching, because I don't know whether our audience would watch family vlog channels. I mean, is there nothing you won't film and post? Like, I don't know. And that's also kind of, exhibit A for the whole, if anything, you owe your children for making them do this. So with this whole, after all I've sacrificed for you, I mean, what about all the things you sacrificed from your children that, you don't seem to have any remorse for, like their privacy or being able to do something intimate without being filmed and put online for people to watch? I mean, ultimately, I think this whole thing, the whole situation, and this is a conclusion I'm not the first in making, a lot of people have said, basically shows we need to put like an end to family vlogging as a concept. I don't go as far as say it should be illegal, because I mean, some people make that argument. I understand, but just because, I don't know, is that like an infringement on free speech or something? I mean, I agree, like the children involved need to be much more protected, like way more so. But I don't know if there's any way to make it illegal or any constitutional way to make it illegal. But so I'm not talking about using it as the law, but I think just anyone who thinks about making a family vlog YouTube channel, don't ever make it. And for the ones who are currently doing it, quit as soon as you possibly can, because you've messed up your children emotionally long enough. It's, I guess I'll put it, since I said I don't know if it should be made illegal. It's one of those things where I don't know if it's illegal if it should be illegal, but at the same time, it is definitely, there is no ethical way to do it, which actually a quote I saw the daughter said, that there's no ethical way to do it. It's one of those things where it's pretty much immoral the entire time. I don't know if it could be made illegal, but it's definitely immoral under all circumstances. And I will say also that anyone who has children and has any sort of desire to film their children and post private moments of their lives from the day they're born and till the day they leave, and let the world see it, and let all their classmates and peers and all that know all their history of their life in a way that they'll never have exposed out there. If that's something you want for your family, then you just shouldn't have kids in the first place. Like, I don't know, get a dog or something.